Hello, everyone. I hope you're all happy and healthy along with your respected families where we're located on this God's green earth. Welcome to today's episode of the Real Talks with Amini. I am honored to have Colonel Justin Sapp, a retired U.S. Army Special Forces who has been serving the United States for over 30 years in various roles and capacities. And has been to the front lines in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and has been to hotspots in Central Asia and Middle East, and is basically has been an honorable member of the U.S. national security community. And we're glad to have him, and we'll talk about him and talk about the situation in Afghanistan right now, and also pathways forward for the country and mutual interests between the United States and Afghanistan. So Justin, welcome to our show. Glad to have you. Thank you for your time. Maybe we can start by knowing about yourself. What motivated you to decide to join the U.S. Armed Forces?
Well, thank you for hosting me. It's my pleasure to be your guest. Well, I came from a military family, or at least we had a tradition of service in my family. My grandparents, my grandfather on both sides. One of my grandfathers passed away during World War II in the Marine Corps. My other grandfather was a sergeant major and did an entire career in the Army. My dad served in the Army, and then he served as an intelligence officer at the CIA for a whole career. So I was brought up in that culture of service. So for me, it was really which path to take. Would I go to a civilian institution like the State Department or CIA or something, or would I go in the military? And for me, from early on, that was wasn't even a real decision. It was just a natural path to follow for me. So I went to university. I went to a military university called Virginia Military Institute, and then I took a commission in the Army. And then in our system, you have to serve three and a half years approximately as an officer in the regular Army before you apply to Special Forces. And then you have to go to a selection course and training. And so that's what I did. I started out as an armor, and then I became a Special Forces officer. And that's what led me where I was when 9/11 happened.
Right. So maybe we can get into that. Where were you when 9/11 happened, and what was your first reaction, and how did you come about being part of the first team, the first interagency team that infiltrated in Afghanistan? Maybe you can talk about that. And how did you feel about the whole mission, about the strategy at the time, and how did it evolve, and any experiences that you had with Afghans that you work with against the Taliban and other terrorists in Afghanistan at the time?
Yeah. So when 9/11 occurred, I was actually in training. So in Special Forces, we have our own dive school that's run by Army Special Forces, and I was attending that course. It was a very, very hard course in terms of physicality and all that kind of stuff. It's very hard. You had to take a pre-test to get in, or pre-course, just to be admitted, and then of course you attended the course. So I was towards the end, the last maybe 2 weeks of that course, week and a half, when 9/11 happened. I was actually underwater. I was diving in the courses in Florida, and I came up from the dive, and we were rinsing our equipment with fresh water, doing the maintenance and recovery, because we had another dive later on. And all of a sudden, the instructors told us to get up into the classroom because they had a briefing, and we didn't really know what was going on, although it seemed somewhat irregular. So we went upstairs, and I remember one of the instructors brought in a VHS tape. So he had been recording CNN or something, and it was a recording of the second plane impacting the towers. And then he said something to the effect that the nation is under attack. This is a terrorist attack or something. And so we will we will discontinue training, and we're going to guard the base. And you will have duties associated with protecting and securing the base. So for like maybe 2 days, we did that. And a lot of people remember it was a very confusing time. So no one really knew. I suspected bin Laden because a month or so before I did this training, I had been in Uzbekistan. I had been in the Fergana Valley training with the Uzbek Spetsnaz, their special forces, commando type units. And their whole focus was fighting the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, led by Namangani. And so I knew about the terrorists. I knew about the milieu in Afghanistan, their relationship with, the Taliban, and of course, bin Laden's role in Afghanistan. So I remember mentioning it to a classmate. We were running, because you had to run everywhere from one place to the other together. And I mentioned it was bin Laden, and he argued with me. He goes, "You don't know that. Like, how do you think you're so smart? You don't know it was bin Laden. It's too early to tell." And I said, "It may be, but it's going to be bin Laden." And sure enough, I maybe a week later, it became very clear, and the administration announced that bin Laden was in fact behind it, or at least they suspected he was. So then things picked up very quickly. But interestingly, they did not cancel the training, which I was actually grateful, because during that time, they didn't really have a plan together, a strategy together. So I was able to finish the course. I was lucky, and then go to my unit on the 20th of September is when I got back to my unit.
Mm-hmm. Right. And tell us about the team that got in, like with the strategy that you guys had to get into Afghanistan and help with the Northern Alliance at the time, the resistance that was fighting against the Taliban. Was the mission clear enough for you guys, and how did it evolve years after? I'm sure you were involved afterwards as well.
Yes. So good question. So things were being formulated as in parallel. So we were moving to do things in preparation for the invasion of Afghanistan, but the plan was not fully formed. It was inchoate. So I went forward. I was told the day I arrived at the unit, or the next morning actually. So Friday I arrived home in the evening. The next morning, Saturday, we're in the commander's office. He said, "Go see Colonel Mulholland, the commander of the group." And he said, "You'll be going somewhere. I have to pick 3 of you out of these 5 guys. We have to select someone to go with the CIA, and then you're going to go into Afghanistan ahead of everybody else. But the idea was you're going to go in, you're going to meet with these leaders of the Northern Alliance, and then you'll come back and inform us, and then we'll use that information to bring in the actual teams that conduct the actual mission, military mission." That's not what happened. So as an example, things were just sort of on the fly, like putting a plane together as you fly was the metaphor that was used. So and that was very true. And the reality was that the plan for the invasion of Afghanistan that became Operation Enduring Freedom in 2001 was not an army, it was not a military, it was not a defense plan. It was a CIA plan. And without going into the whole sort of details of how that came about, well, they weren't sort of, the reality was it was whoever convinced the president that they had the best plan. And it turned out that the most formulated plan at the time was presented by this individual called Cofer Black at the CIA. That was presented by the director of the CIA to the president in a meeting, and the president agreed that that was the right strategy going forward. It was kind of risky, but it relied heavily on and it rested heavily on the CIA's relations with the Northern Alliance, which weren't super strong, but they were better than anybody else's relationships.
Right.
At least we know other countries had some relation, but whatever. That was what we had, so that made the most sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we went on. Then the idea was to get teams in to link up with these guys, assess who is the best leader, who, to figure out what support they needed, inform them, and then support them militarily.
Right. Right. I mean, there's so much into it that I can get into, but I would like to stay at the overview of the whole mission. So looking back, how did you see 2001, 2002, 2003, and all the coming up to 2021? What do you think changed in terms of the U.S. strategy towards Afghanistan? Was it the same adjustment of a strategy as we went along, like it was in the early days of 2001, or you think there was an actual thinking behind of what the U.S. wanted to accomplish in Afghanistan?
Well, I think it changed. So when we went in 2001, I mean, let's be clear, it was about vengeance. Okay, I mean, that's I believe that was obvious. And the first name for the operation was like Infinite Justice or something. I don't remember, but it didn't last very long. And then it became Operation Enduring Freedom, because the whole point was the president of the United States cannot stand by and let something like 9/11 happen without taking action. All right. So the question was, what was he going to do? So we bombed the Talibs in October the 6th and 7th. That was the beginning of their interdiction campaign. We hit some airfields in the north and all over, and whatever few aircraft the Taliban had. But we all knew this was not the real struggle. The real struggle was going to be on the ground. The strategy was simply to support the right guys in the Northern Alliance to the extent possible so they could defeat the Taliban. The mission was to get the Al Qaeda guys responsible for 9/11, of course. That was the desired end state. But to get to them, we knew you had to defeat the Taliban, because the Taliban had provided them safe haven, etc. We all know this, and that Muhammad Omar and Bin Laden had a friendship, etc. That Mullah Muhammad Omar would not break. So now he would have to suffer the consequences of that decision. And so that was just logical. So when we got there, we were always looking for Al Qaeda, but the reality was there was different layers of the Taliban we had to get through. We had to get through the local guys who were forced in. Then we had to deal with the Kandahari guys. And then we had to deal with the Al Ansar Brigade and the foreign fighters and the Al Qaeda guys, obviously. So it was sort of a tiered thing, like a onion or something. That was the strategy. And it was pretty straightforward. Later, what happened after the Bonn meetings in Bonn in 2002, we decided as the United States and our allies agreed that we should install a sort of centralized government in Afghanistan, one that would basically run Afghanistan in a way, in my view, that Afghanistan had not experienced. Yes, they had a king, etc., but the experience of a centralized authority has always been problematic in Afghanistan, and we know that. Now, in the north, it's different than the south, but in the south, where I served later, I saw that it's very difficult to extend that authority. So I think that was a mistake, that strategy was a mistake. We also wrote a constitution that was based on kind of our principles as Americans. And it seemed great at the time because that was sort of the attitude of, we're going to spread democracy and the Taliban are evil, so we have to replace them with something good, which is some sort of democratic system. But we didn't take into account the realities of Afghanistan, right? I mean, it's a different culture, different country, different history. Everything's different. And I think we were high-minded and idealistic to a fault. And then when that system started to fail later on, then we didn't correct the course. Part of that was we were focused on Iraq, because then after 2003 forward, I went to Iraq and was focused on Iraq until 2010 or 10. So there's a whole period of like 8 years, more than 8 years, Afghanistan was not the place to go if you were a soldier. You want to be in Iraq. Afghanistan was kind of like considered slow and kind of boring. Everything was good there. That was the attitude. And Iraq was the bad place, and that's where the fighting was. And as a soldier, that's where you want to be, where the fighting is. So, but that changed. We know in 2009, 2010, that changed and became worse. We didn't correct that. And then we also, this is my personal view, and it would be very unpopular to say this to a lot of people not that long ago, that it all became a struggle of force generation, as it was in Vietnam. We have to create enough Afghan National Army forces, security forces, to fight the Taliban in the districts, because the fighting was mostly in the rural areas. At this time, I was in the South. This is like 2011. And that strategy was all about generating these guys and getting them out. Special Forces has its own program that was augmenting the security in the districts, in the rural areas. But it was always like, I noticed we were bringing guys, a lot of the trusted guys, not all, but disproportionately from the north. So they're down south, but they're northerners. So they don't speak Pashto. They maybe speak a little better than I do. Like, I mean, there were some issues there and a lot of struggles ethnically. I think that in retrospect, we should have gone from the very beginning with the ethnic based approach to Afghanistan. Like, you have units that are ethnic because you're using those social and cultural bonds that already exist. And I really think we should have gone that way. That would have been very unpopular in 2002. And I tell you, I even knew that it wouldn't. We believe that because that's how we were successful, because we only helped the Northern Alliance. We didn't do the fighting for them. They did the fighting. We simply helped them. We used what was there existing and we gave them a little assistance. And that was enough to defeat the Taliban.
Hmm.
Instead of like making them dependent, the ANA more and more dependent on us to the point where we're trying to back out. So our forces are engaged. We're trying to generate forces from the Afghan National Security Forces to replace us so we can disengage from Afghanistan. That was what we were doing starting in 2011 and 12, et cetera. And we never could really do that. We did that, but then there was problems associated with it. I think a lot of that was structural. Part of it was structural.
Hmm.
And I think we could have avoided that very early on by building things on a different foundation that was more alike the way the Northern Alliance was formed. Would it be perfect? No. Would Muhammad Atta and Dostum be arguing with each other? Of course. But you can manage that politically rather than forcing a system that, honestly, and I don't want to go into too much detail because I give you so many examples, but now you're forcing a system on people and they have to choose. It's a binary choice. Hamid Karzai or their cousin down the street who's the Taliban guy, right? And who's closer to him and who's more of a threat to him. It gets very complicated, as you know. And so, in my view, the strategy was flawed from about 2002 onward, and
Hmm.
it only became worse. But it took some time. It took some time because the Afghan people they don't make up their mind like that, right? But slowly things started shifting in certain parts of Afghanistan. And it didn't progress evenly. It's very different from place to place. But most of the problems were in the south, in the east. And then there was pockets in the north, Kunduz, et cetera, where there's a lot of issues later on. And there's all sorts of reasons for that are obvious. So my view is that we did not work with the existing cultural uh, uh, realities personally. That would take a very nuanced and sophisticated approach. You need guys who understand culture and the language, and we don't have a lot of those guys. So it assumes a lot, but in retrospect, that was the problem. The mistake we made was the strategy from the very beginning was flawed.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot to unpack there, but maybe at some other time we'll get into those. I think I wouldn't put all of the blame on the U.S. On how they put the structure in, because at the end of the day, structure is a structure. It's the human element, which were the Afghans that were running that structure, that I think that we need to look into much more closer in terms of how they manage the system. Because as you rightly indicated, there were a period of tranquility and calm and peace in Afghanistan. What went wrong? I don't think it was the structure's fault. It was the people who were managing it that probably got into the greedy aspect of their own, how they wanted to empower themselves, how they wanted to control the whole power into one single hand, and they didn't know how to do it, and they were mismanaging and mistreating Afghans and misbehaving with how they were running the institutions of governance, probably due to corruption and nepotism and other aspects that led to the weakening of the system. So if we look at it in a fair aspect, I wouldn't put all of the blame on the U.S. side. So maybe we can move a little bit. So how do you feel with the Taliban rolling in for the second time? As someone who were in the front line fighting against them, fighting against Al-Qaeda, seeing the Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters and all of the terrorists rolling in, recapturing Afghanistan in 2021. How did you and other colleagues of yourself who served dedicatedly in Afghanistan, some who lost their lives, some their families, and those who were wounded, and others, how did you guys felt about it?
Well, my teammate, and he was our team leader of our sub team, Michael Spann, was the first American to die in combat in Afghanistan. So for me, it was very personal, as it was for everybody on the team. I was, strangely enough, I was at a MRI appointment at Bethesda Naval Hospital. So this was towards the end of my career, within 2 years of retiring. So I was doing some medical stuff that's pretty normal when the news of the collapse came on the TV, etc., CNN, whatever it was. And then shortly thereafter, I started getting text messages and emails through our network from Shannon Spann, Michael Spann's widow, David Tyson, who's my friend from the team, and some other people, and they started streaming in. Yeah, it was a huge psychological strain on everybody, and you were sort of helpless. You're not there. Things are unfolding in a way you have zero control over. Your instinct is to somehow go over there. I know some people bought plane tickets or whatever, but it was just a mess, and it got progressively worse. And so there's no way to describe it other than it was heart wrenching, and we never really recovered from that.
Yeah.
Frankly, just emotionally, you can't.
Yeah.
I invested, between Iraq and Afghanistan, 3/4 of my career of 30 years was spent focused on one of those two areas. So yeah, it's your whole most of your adult life, or 2/3 of it.
Yeah, yep. I can imagine the heartbreak that everybody must have felt. All of your achievements. Basically, the whole circle coming back. So, how do you assess right now, since the Taliban took over? There was a narrative that the Taliban 2.0, that they have cut their ties with Al Qaeda, but we saw how Ayman al-Zawahiri was in Kabul, that they have indicated that they're different from ISIS-K, or they're anti-ISIS-K, but now we're seeing how they're working together. The ISIS-K and Taliban. They're basically two sides of the same coin, and other terrorist groups who have terrorist fighters and foreign terrorist organizations who've all come down to Afghanistan. How do you see the threat level in Afghanistan towards the U.S. homeland right now?
I think it's present, and I think it's only gotten worse. I think the Taliban made an effort in the first year to 2 years to present an image that they were somehow different. A lot of the old guard guys were still around, but they weren't. They were influential, but maybe not as influential. There was a lot of speculation. Okay, what is their role going to be? But then you see Siraj and these guys come in, and it's like, okay, we know who we're dealing with. This is a facade. They kept it up for a while, particularly with respect to how they treat women, and that we're gonna change our ways, and there'll be more freedoms associated with women's education, all this kind of stuff. Obviously, that didn't last. In my view, I wasn't surprised at all. I thought tactically what they were trying to do is get international recognition, which is what they craved in legitimacy, with the UN and with the West, so they could get sanctions lifted, etc. I mean, that's just kind of a very logical approach to things. When they saw that wasn't going to happen the way they wanted to, I think they kind of gave up, frankly. With respect to our allies, I mean, they're in danger very much. I think that it depends on who you are. So, for example, the guys we work with were older guys by this time, right? They were, older guys. Some of them were quite senior. The ones that couldn't get out, because it was very much a scramble in the beginning. I mean, if you could get to Kabul, it was completely random. And if you can get over the fence, or you can get one of those few planes that left Mazar Sharif, then you were okay. At least you got to Doha, or you got to Romania, or wherever it was, and you would eventually make it to the U.S. But most of our guys were not near Kabul. They were in the north, so they didn't have that opportunity. They could go to other countries, neighboring countries. So, and if they didn't, then they had to go into hiding. There's all sorts of stories. I did a testimony at the House Foreign Affairs Committee a year and a half ago, roughly, where I made testimony as to exactly what was happening. So did a lot of other charity organizations. So it's very real. I think the Taliban are hoping that people don't pay attention to them as much. And I think some of that's true, that over time they believe that people kind of forget about this and they can reinvent themselves. But their ethos and their whole identity, in my view, they are natural allies with Al Qaeda. So we look for Ayman al-Zawahiri for how many? 10 years, maybe? No, 20 years, something like that. We were looking for him. Then shortly after the fall in Afghanistan, he shows up. He's living in a nice apartment, and then we killed him with the type of Hellfire missile. After all those years, so he obviously felt that he was safe there and that he would be treated well and that he was welcome. And I think that's very clear. So it's reasonable to expect that these other, the younger generation of Al Qaeda are there and are at minimum, they're receiving safe haven there. So that's not good. And the policy of the United States is to seek them out to the extent possible. ISIS, Daesh, whatever you want to call them, they're there as well. Ideologically, they may be a little not in line with the Taliban, but it doesn't matter. You know, Afghanistan, you don't have to be friends with the government to find safe haven there. There's people that will provide you safe haven if you stay within the confines and you do the right thing to keep them happy. So yeah, it's a very dangerous cocktail. And I think it's only a matter of time before something emanates from there, as it is in other parts of the world. I was just in Africa. Daesh is there as well, in Congo and Mozambique. This is a worldwide issue, and these kind of places are natural fertile grounds for these groups, obviously. And it's been like that since, let's be candid, probably since the mid 80s.
Yeah. And how do you assess, you pointed out to the U.S. strategy towards the counterterrorism strategy. How do you assess that strategy right now towards Afghanistan? Do you think this over-the-horizon capability is enough to counter the strategy? It wasn't enough in the 1990s when, they started shooting some missiles over, but still, the largest scale attack happened on the United States. You think this capability right now is enough to counter any threat towards the U.S. homeland?
No, I personally don't. I know that our technology has improved over the years, and with the capability of, ISR drones and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's never enough because, quite frankly, you can't have the fidelity that we had on the ground in Afghanistan. There's no one can convince me of that because it's just not logical. So you're going to use technical means to sort of keep an eye on these guys. You have standoff capability to strike. The U.S. does have that. There's no question about that. But as you pointed out, in the early 90s, we did that against Al Qaeda affiliates. And these were like Tomahawk land attack missiles. It didn't work, clearly. So there's limitations to what you can do. But now you add further distance from Afghanistan, and we no longer have a presence there. None. No real presence like we used to. So yeah, it's just going to be more difficult and less effective. There's no way you can argue otherwise. I think this over the horizon thing, which started well before the collapse of the Taliban, that was a strategy to eventually retrograde from Afghanistan, to have this capability in Qatar or wherever in the Gulf. Now you got to fly around Iran, right? I mean, come on, stupid, right? I mean, in my view, it just doesn't make sense. Distance and lack of people on the ground leave huge gaps in human intelligence capacity, which is a very important part of the intelligence production, and technical means and further distance from the problem set is inferior, in my view, to what it could be.
Yep, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of people who argued that, U.S. was safe for the last 20 years. No terrorist attack happened emanating from Afghanistan. I think they miss and forget that because of the capabilities on the ground, they were fighting against the terrorism on a daily basis, that partnering with Afghan forces, that they would go into all of these corners of the country and take out any terrorist network that would try to harm the U.S. interest, that there was no attack in the U.S. homeland. And so now that that's not there, threats are evolving, and increasingly has already gotten to the United States. Some ISIS-K fighters or those who have infiltrated the United States and attacked different parts and some Western countries, they claim to be ISIS-K, but as you rightly indicated, there's no difference between these terrorist groups. At the end of the day, they all share hatred towards the U.S. and Western countries. And so now that the Taliban are in charge, it's a safe ground basically for everybody to come there and then plan and then execute their attacks around the world. So let's see. Hopefully things will change with the new administration. We'll talk about it in a second. But maybe if you can talk about the top Pakistan's strategy right now. Pakistan has been playing this double game with the support of the Taliban, as well as allowing access for U.S. forces to get into Afghanistan. What do you think their current strategy is with the current situation that they're faced inside the country? What do you think is their strategy towards Taliban and other terrorist groups in the region?
So my view is to exercise as much indirect control as possible. And I say indirect in the sense that so they don't have to be on the ground as much as say we were, right? So they can do that, and they know they can do that through their intelligence services and so forth. But their overarching goal, as everybody knows, if you're a Pakistani military officer, you get up every day, you look in the mirror, and your concern is India, right? I mean, that's just baked in. So Afghanistan must never be any sort of ally or in any way helpful to India, is their view. I really think it's that simple. That's the big picture. And then, so how do they prevent that? They prevent that by controlling it to the extent possible. We know they were obviously in with the Taliban in 2001. When we arrived, they were there. Maybe not in a lot of numbers. They were very much on the ground after the collapse, as they went after the resistance and the Panjshir and further up in northeastern Afghanistan. They were there. So they're going to exercise control as much as possible. There's going to be, problems in Pakistan from their own variants of Taliban that they need to deal with, and they are dealing with that. But at the end of the day, it's to control it so it's not a threat to them, and to basically manage things as they managed in the 90s with Takmatyar and these guys. And they'll support whomever. They're very whatever you want to call it, Machiavellian or shrewd about it. It's I think a very logical approach, and in their view, it's sort of a form of unconventional warfare, which is where the community I come from. So I understand what they're doing. I think it's obviously nefarious and wrong and harmful, but from their strategy, it's all points towards securing themselves against India.
Yeah. Well, they are right now undermining their own national security from within. So let's see how that will turn out to them. What do you think about Iran? They're also in bed with the Taliban, and we have seen the growing evidence that they are involved with the Taliban leadership in Kandahar, and they're advising them. All of the decrees that they're issuing, they're being written by the Iranian officers, IRGC officers, and the appointments that they do, the shuffling, the type of decrees and restrictions that they're imposing is similar to how the IRGC solidified their power in the early days of the Iranian Revolution. So we see that's a copycat that they're imposing on Afghanistan. Now, what do you think is their strategy? Do you think their proxy involvement in Afghanistan with the Taliban is the same as their proxy involvement in Iraq and Syria and Yemen, or it's different?
I don't. So it's definitely involvement. Right now, I don't think it is as. I'm just relatively speaking, it's not as quite as extensive as it was, say, in Syria. But now Syria they were defeated there. And we know that they brought Afghans who were sympathetic to whatever religious overtures they made. There are Afghans in Syria fighting on behalf of Iran. So we know that they have influence and they can recruit people, and they have people that are sympathetic to them. But in my view, I think they see Afghanistan as sort of like a neighbor that they need to make sure that the instability there does not threaten them. So they'll use proxies and they'll use IRGC to at first keep an eye on things so they understand what's going on, so they can suppress any fires and put them out in advance. And they've been doing that for years. When I arrived in 2001, there was a Quds Force guy with in our area, and we had no problems with them, but it was very clear that they had these guys placed strategically in areas so they could keep tabs on things. And the relationship with the Talibs ebb and flow. It's very much, I think, a transactional kind of approach. When over the years, like in the late 90s, they almost got into a fight with the Talibs. We know this, and then that sort of subsided. So it ebbs and flows. There's no natural affinity. I think it's just pragmatic. Quite frankly, their natural affinity is going to be with certain ethnic groups that are akin to their religious views and their lineage are very similar. I don't understand that quite that well. I really don't. My view was Iran was always dabbling when we were there. I remember in '02, the rumor spread that I think it was Mullah Dadullah or one of these guys was in Iran, and the Iranians would give them safe haven there as sort of coins in their pocket as a tactical piece, a card they can play later. There's evidence that they provided aid and comfort to the Taliban extended family, or not the Taliban, the Al Qaeda, Mullah Muhammad, Bin Laden's family. We do know that now, I think, but it's all very much like a very transactional approach to things, and that's how I think they view things. There's much stronger ties, I think, or they're much more aggressive through the Houthis because the Houthis have a direct ability to attack and influence international shipping, which gets the headlines, which influences and projects their image of strength. So they want to be perceived as a regional power. In Afghanistan, I think it's more, hey, we need to keep things under control so it doesn't threaten our border. And oh, by the way, we have some recruits and some people that will help us, and we can use them as proxy forces in other areas.
Right.
And they have. We know that.
Yep. And I think during the years that they wanted to eject the U.S. forces from Afghanistan, they developed significant ties with the Taliban. There was Mullah Mansour, the previous Taliban leader, was when he came out from Iran, he was killed. So it was clearly that the Iranians had significant influence over the leadership of the Taliban, and that influence continued because they're also involved in drug trafficking to Europe and other countries through Iran. And so I think they've developed significant ties with them, and the Sunni-Shia divide that sometimes we see, it's a superficial divide that at the end of the day, the extremist elements, they always cooperate with each other when it comes to how they counter the Western countries. And they're publicly saying that they need to solidify and further cooperate together to undermine the West and the US. So we'll see how that relationship will evolve. We know the Russians were involved in paying the Taliban and others to go after the US forces in Afghanistan, and they have they've developed ties, and we see that publicly displaying in Afghanistan, and the Chinese are also involved. How do you see those two countries playing with Taliban as an umbrella organization for all of the terrorist groups? Do you think there's a strategy of an asymmetric plan to counter the West and the US because they cannot do it directly in direct confrontation, that they might be thinking about using terrorist groups under the umbrella of the Taliban to go after the West and the US, and instead of waiting to see when Taiwan incident happens or something else?
Yeah, I'll just first to capstone the last topic. I would say, yeah, I forgot about Mullah Mansour. There's so many examples, and in fact, I meant to say it was Mullah Baradar. So from the very beginning, there was just so many examples of Iran meddling in Afghanistan for pragmatic reasons, in low risk to them. With the Chinese, I'll say that the Chinese, I think it was relayed to me one time through a friend. His mother had been a speechwriter or a translator for Deng Xiaoping or somebody back in the day. So she was fairly in the know. She said that China was sort of it was a mystery what the U.S. was doing in Afghanistan, and it was perplexing to them. And I bring that up because I think the Chinese are not big risk takers geostrategically. They aren't. They've never been. But when you're on their border, and Badakhshan is obviously on their border, not a big border, but a border, then you're going to have some sort of strategy, and you're going to have to, going to influence things to the extent possible. But I think that they just see it as an opportunity. The U.S. has left. There's a vacuum. They have influence in Central Asia, clearly in Kazakhstan, and probably more in Kyrgyzstan, as part of the whole extension of the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think just from a pragmatic point of view, if they can get concessions with the mining in the north, which they have. I don't know tons of detail about it. I do know they're in the north and they're doing some mining. There's a lot of mineral resources there. They'll, to the extent possible, they'll do that, just as they are involved in Pakistan, although they have a much better and stronger relationship with Pakistan going back many years. But I think from them, it's just pragmatic. It's a vacuum to be filled. They never really would have risked going in there and sort of getting in conflict with us over it. It's not worth it to them until we left, and then it was easy. It was like, and then they will keep it on the low ground because they know the Taliban is not popular in the international community for obvious reasons because of the human rights record, etc. But they will do business with them and keep it below the radar screen and make a profit. And who knows, maybe this road, there's some rumor, I don't know if it's true. I read it in the open source about a road, an idea for a road going through Badakhshan and across into what is it, the Xinjiang province and Karakoram area is something they're talking about. I don't know. Makes sense from their point of view, and they'll do whatever is pragmatic and profitable.
Yeah, they've got Central Asia. They've got this new agreement with Iran, and so Afghanistan also under their belt, and Pakistan. I think they can easily get to Saudi Arabia and other places. And I think, as you indicated, they're increasingly, slowly, very cautiously expanding their geopolitical influence. And I think we're seeing wherever they are, the U.S. Influence is shrinking. Wherever they become much more interested in terms of economic interest, that is like the umbrella, but deep down, they're also paying all of the nefarious groups in cash, and that undermines the security of the U.S. forces wherever they're located. That affected in Afghanistan because their engagement with Taliban basically empowered the Taliban politically and otherwise. And even right now, they're advocating on behalf of the Taliban at the stages regionally and internationally, and they're just waiting for they're expecting. I don't think it's going to happen, but that's what they were betting on, that the international community would recognize Taliban, and then they would get in with all of their money and investments, and basically trying to see if they could get their hands on the trillions of worth of the resources that Afghanistan has. Hopefully, the new administration will have a plan to counter that as well. What about Russia, if you can talk about it?
Yeah, so I can't claim to know tons about their nefarious doings in Afghanistan, but I don't doubt it. So I've been out of government for just about a year now. And I was not, although I worked at the U.S. mission in the UN, I did not, Afghanistan was in my portfolio. I saw the reports of the Russians dealing with the Taliban to undermine the United States, and that even there had been some payments made and so forth. I don't really know the veracity of that because I just don't, but I wouldn't be surprised at all. From their point of view, it's just, it's something that is a low expense to undermine the United States. And if they can kick us while in the ass as we're, excuse my French, as we're leaving, they would do that. It's totally within their playbook, and it makes sense. And then by extension, they have interest in Central Asia. I don't think they have interest in Afghanistan the way they used to, because now the boundaries for them, it's all about proximity. So now the boundaries are further away. So their concern is with Tajikistan and Kazakhstan and all that. They have interest in Tajikistan. Afghanistan's the next sort of tier. So their whole strategy there is to influence things so Central Asia is stable. And by extension, they don't get, they minimize the threats going into Russia, which, as we know, they had a problem with that, mainly from Tajikistan. There were guys coming into this very recently doing acts of terrorism. So I think that's how they look at it. And if it's at the expense of the U.S., all the more reason to do it.
Yeah, I mean, they were the ones who extended the invitations to Taliban leaders and brought them out of the caves and hidings. Basically, provided political legitimacy for them by inviting to Moscow and then Beijing and then Tehran. These three countries were basically, it's kind of like axis of evil, trying to see how they could take advantage of terrorism against the West and the U.S., which basically forced the U.S. to to also go towards the negotiation, because the U.S. saw how the neighboring countries were trying to do it. So we'll see how their policies will evolve. I think they're zeroed in on making sure the U.S. never returns back to Afghanistan, and also any terrorist group or the complex of the terrorist networks that are being created, managed by ISI or IRGC with the help of the Chinese, and that they could also be in conjunction and cahoots with the Russians, so they can advance their interest regionally and globally. So maybe you could talk about the anti-Taliban Afghans. What's your assessment in the past few years? The armed resistance, the political resistance, the civil resistance, the women activists who are trying to make sure that the voices of Afghans are being heard, and that the more than 20 million women and girls who are basically in prison in Afghanistan right now with no rights, their voices being heard, and for their freedom advocacy. How do you evaluate it, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, our worst fears came true. I mean, we knew this in our heart of hearts, this would be the outcome. Whatever tactical maneuvering or whatever sort of a facade that they wanted to erect in the early days to sort of get the ire of the international community off them and the attention. Now, largely, it's been a couple of years now, so attention is focused elsewhere. But that's the one issue that always comes up with respect to Afghanistan. It is the treatment of women's rights, education, so forth. And it keeps getting worse and worse and worse with every season. Seems like every news cycle, there's a new example. But sadly, we knew this is who they are. This is their ethos. They can't, I don't believe in their heart of hearts that they can reconcile one with the other. It's irreconcilable to them. I'm looking at it from their point of view. And that's the problem. And that's why there's no reconciling with these guys. And I hope that going forward, the United States and the West will continue to put as much pressure as possible on them, because their values are inimical to
Mm-hmm.
and should be inimical to the values of the Afghan people. Now, you know, it's complicated. I mean, it's not going to be, we shouldn't expect that Afghanistan would ever be just like, Fairfax County, Virginia, or something like that. I mean, that's not realistic, but we're talking a whole nother level of oppression, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. So they have my sympathy. The issue, I think, is what can be done. I have not followed the resistance actions very much lately, just because I've been traveling a lot. But my sense is that it's, isolated certain areas, the physical, the armed resistance. I'm a soldier, I'm a guerrilla fighter guy, so that's where I want to go. And I think that's something that you should always retain, that capability. And in my view, support that capability to the extent possible. But I just don't know. I can't comment on it, with any sort of granularity right now. But the pressure is right. So you have all sorts of different levels of national power that can be imposed. The international bit is very important, and keeping solidarity within the UN and the General Assembly and the Security Council vis-a-vis the Taliban is very important, because I would see indicators when I was there that people were thinking about loosening the restrictions on them. I can tell you this: the women's issue is probably the one issue that attracts the most attention at the UN, in my view, and in the world, and in the West. Whether that's right or wrong, I mean, it's right in my view, but that is the one issue that really brings a lot of negative attention, and rightly so, on the Taliban. And to the extent that they continue that, I think that we need to, keep them isolated for perpetuity for that alone, not to mention all the other things.
Yes, yeah. And what's your assessment of the new administration and their program? We're still waiting. They're doing the review to see what they will come up as their strategy. But what we know so far is that they are keen on getting back Bagram Air Base. They're keen on making sure that these weapons who are left in the hands of the Taliban are no longer in the hands of the Taliban. I know we are hearing about taking them back, which I don't think is practical. Probably they're thinking about destroying them through aerial bombardments or other mechanisms. And also, Afghans are working simultaneously on programs to do a national uprising against the Taliban. And as you indicated, the resistance is also in some pockets, and they're trying to do whatever they can. How do you think this, the U.S. strategy and Afghans' willingness and efforts to go towards freedom and getting rid of the Taliban will coincide or reconcile together in a future? How do you envision the future for Afghanistan from an optimistic perspective?
Well, I can't claim to know what the administration is thinking vis-a-vis Afghanistan or what their strategy will be. I don't think it's fully formed yet. I think that's safe to say. I believe that it will be very much like a carrot and stick approach. Okay, so if you want to loosen the pressure, then you have to behave in a way that's that you do good, you behave well. With respect to the equipment, I don't know, like some of the stuff, like the containerized housing and all that, that's not really an issue. But yeah, the higher end vehicles, the MRAPs, the helicopters, we see them crashing the helicopters the other day. It's a shame, and it's billions of dollars. I forget how much. I don't know if air interdiction would be sufficient to get all of it. I mean, remember, probably the most useful things to them are all the rifles and stuff that we provided to the Afghan army, both the United States and Canada. Actually, Canada made a lot of those rifles. Those are now clearly brandished by the Taliban, and those are easy to remission, and they're using them a lot. And honestly, I see some of the stuff they're doing. It's obvious that some of the training we gave has sort of been imbued in them, and the Taliban have adapted it. So that we can't get back. But yeah, the high end equipment, I think you could destroy it, but I don't know if that they maybe what they'll do is say, look, and I'm completely speculating, is like, hey, we want this back, and you're gonna give it back or else. And then there'll be a whole menu of consequences that we have at our disposal to compel that action. Yeah. I don't know. I really can't speculate, but what's done is done. I'm not so worried about the higher end stuff. I mean, maybe it's been taken by certain countries to be reverse engineered or examined, probably. I just think the stuff like the weapons, the basic small arms and stuff like that, those things could last, years and years and years. They last 20 years if they're well maintained, and those could be used in terrorist attacks. They can be used in so many different ways as you can, I mean, anybody with half an imagination can extrapolate there. So yeah, it's bad. But what the administration is going to do, I just don't know. I really don't.
Yeah. And what do you think the viability of getting Bagram back?
Oh, okay. I think that's great. If I was asked for my opinion, I would say that you would probably want more than just Bagram. I mean, Bagram's an established airfield that's been, God knows how much money we poured in there. I spent a lot of time there. It's a very viable airfield, but there's other ones too. That is probably the most prominent one, and it would give us a base in that part of the world that would be very useful. Now, how we're going to negotiate that with whomever's in charge in Afghanistan, I don't know. I haven't heard much about that. I personally, I mean, I have my own views of what we should do in Afghanistan, pretty extreme. But yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense from a geostrategic point of view, irrespective of my emotional ties to what goes on in Afghanistan.
Yeah. Hopefully there's no more negotiations with the Taliban. Hopefully the US would bet on the people of Afghanistan and realize that at the end of the day, those bases belong to the people of Afghanistan. And if they want to go back to those bases, they need to mend and repair the relationship that was there with the people of Afghanistan by making sure that they support the people of Afghanistan to get rid of the Taliban and bring back a government that is representative of the will of the people of Afghanistan. And that would be a much more easy, cost-effective way and sustainable way for the long term to be present in Afghanistan, and instead of going talking with terrorists who will stab you from the back, and they've always done it. And these terrorists are never reliable and trustworthy. I think we all know that. So maybe at the end we'll have, there's a lot that we can talk, but I know you have to go towards meeting and I have to get into some things. So maybe you can have your message to the people of Afghanistan, if you have any, to the women of Afghanistan, to the people who are stuck under the Taliban rule, to the refugees, as well as to the Americans. If you have any message to the U.S. leadership as well, we'll be glad to have it.
Well, I would say it's easy for me to say sitting here in my home in the Northeast U.S. But I mean, never give up hope. I hold out hope that the United States will do the right thing in Afghanistan in the future. I was there in the very beginning when we were with the Northern Alliance on a mountaintop, living in trench lines and bunkers and kalas in the villages. There's always a way out. There's always a way up. And I believe the United States should be part of that solution. My advice to the U.S. administration would be simply do the right thing. Do not reward in any way the Taliban. Keep the pressure on them. And if I had my way, we'd be back in Afghanistan and we would fight them and destroy them and beat them and defeat them in battle and reestablish a just government in Afghanistan. That's my view, but I realize some people won't share that. But there's other things you can do and other measures to do the right thing and help the Afghan people, mainly through international pressure, sanctions, political pressure, and so forth, to end the unjust and restrictive nature of this regime that unfortunately millions of Afghans are living under right now.
Yeah. Well, I know for sure that your view is not that popular right now in the administration. I can assure you, especially at the leadership level. Secretary of Defense shares that view. National Security Advisor shares that view. We heard the other day from the spokesperson from the Pentagon how he feels about the situation in Afghanistan. And I think you would be surprised to know that a lot of people who are contemplating the idea of, completing the mission. So hopefully we will go towards that path, and the U.S. would do the right thing that will, distinguish the U.S. from other authoritarian states who are right now in bed with the Taliban and terrorist groups, and U.S. taking back the leadership role for liberty and justice and freedom that it has always done, and that is a source of strength for the U.S. To play a global leadership role in the world. So hopefully we will go towards that route. Well, thank you very much, Justin. It was really glad to have you. It was really a pleasure. We had a lot to talk about. There's a lot that I can talk more, but maybe in the future programs we'll invite you again to speak in details on some of the aspects that you discussed. And to all of our viewers, this was the episode on Real Talks with Amini with Colonel Justin Sapp, a retired U.S. Army Special Forces officer with over 30 years of honorable service to the U.S. national security around the world, particularly by serving in the front lines in Afghanistan, Iraq, and hotspots in Central Asia and Middle East. And he's a keen follower of the affairs of Afghanistan and is a friend of Afghanistan and is advocating on behalf of Afghans still in various capacities. He and his friends have been trying to shape the policy towards Afghanistan and to help Afghans in need wherever they can. So thank you very much for all of your services, Justin. God bless you. God bless Afghanistan. God bless the United States, and God bless our world.
God bless Afghanistan, indeed. Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.